Ontario would have to build 650,000 more homes just to get to the national average. I was doing some research the other day, and I found out that amongst all the G7 countries, Canada has the lowest average housing supply per capita. This quickly becomes massive when you dive into it, as the G7 countries consist of Italy with nearly 60 million people, the United Kingdom and France with 67 million people each, Germany with 83 million, Japan with almost 126 million, the United States with 330 million, the European Union at a whopping 447 million people, and of course, Canada. But Canada only has 38 million people. So we have the lowest population by a lot, and the least ability to house our people. Canada has 424 units of housing per 1,000 people. That's almost 60% of Canadians without an available home at all. Sadly, this has historically been true as well. The number of houses per 1,000 Canadians has been dropping since actually back in 2016. So this is not a new issue to us. So why is the conversation in the news so focused on it, especially now? Well, we all know that the last 2 years have made a huge difference in prices for the real estate market. In our local market of Grey Bruce Owen Sound area, prices have gone up by 30.8% just from 2020 to 2021. Its highest peak was actually in December of 2021, when prices were up 48.5% compared to December of the year before. And it really isn't just us either. It's across all of Canada. This number was still scary when you average it out across the whole country, with price increases looking from 25.3% all the way to 43%, depending on what metrics you decide to include or not include in your findings. But the big question remains of why now? How did we get such high prices and so few homes in the market? And how does it keep getting worse and worse as time has gone on? First off, surprisingly, the relief funds. Our government decided not to let what was happening in the world totally kill off our economy, even though it did suffer. And we had an unprecedented amount of stimuli checks going out. Now, when looking on the individual level, this was great, as it allowed most people to keep paying their mortgage, even if they were sent home from work, and that matters. The side effect from this, though, is that all the predictions of the bubble popping, the market crashing, foreclosures. Now, we actually call them powers of sale in Canada, but because of American media, lots of people know them as foreclosures. Anyways, that didn't really happen. I can count on one hand how many there were in our area, at least. There were no noticeable increase in power of sales compared to previous years. And if there had been, that would have helped neutralize prices a lot. So, essentially, most folks were able to keep their home, if they already owned one, that is. Now, we take that knowledge and combine it with new working habits. Having to work from home, a lot of people realized that traditional office buildings quickly became undesirable, and many people were told that they may never have to return to their city cubicle. And cue the exodus. If you don't need to work in the city, why would you pay city prices? More than 64,000 people left Toronto alone for other parts of Ontario in the middle of 2020 to 2021. Montreal, Canada's second largest city, saw 40,000 people also move out. People were moving out to smaller cities, such as Hamilton and St. Catharines, where both of them nearly gained about 5,000 people each. So when competition ran too high in those places, then people began mass migrations all across Ontario into even smaller markets that, quite frankly, were not ready for this influx of new residents. They had massive inventory issues already, and now they had so many more people that wanted to move there. And they had the money to do so as well. They had the money because mortgage rates were the most affordable they may have ever been. We have laws here in Canada that the Bank of Canada, which, side note, is literally where everybody gets their money from in this country, cannot drop below 0.25% interest rate. This helps protect both us and our economy. Now, we did see the Bank of Canada lower their rate to this bare minimum floor in an effort to help keep people in their homes and keep the economy going and stimulated with people buying, but then it stayed there. And it's kind of still there, having barely increased from the initial drop. Now, 0.25% is not what we as consumers receive, as banks like CIBC and TD, they have to borrow their money from the Bank of Canada first, and then it comes to us. But I've had clients get mortgages for as low as like 1.4% in this market. My parents would always joke about how their first home cost them 18%, but our generation, especially recently, has been able to borrow money for next to nothing. So when money is so cheap to borrow, people are rewarded for investing if you have the down payments available to do so. So we had people leaving the cities on an unprecedented scale and able to borrow money nearly freely and moving to smaller towns all around Ontario because at the time, our little towns seemed hilariously cheap compared to where they were coming from. To put it in perspective, same-sized condos in Kitchener that sell for about $600,000 roughly right now, well, in Kincardine, those sell for $325,000. That's a big difference for a buyer. This created an intense squeeze on really small towns that had often suffered from low inventory before, now seeing a massive influx of new buyers who were showing up with often a higher pay scale in some regards, and a renewed hope and vigor that they could finally own a home, which is often a dream that dies for a lot of city dwellers. Now, those who had already owned homes in the city, they were able to sell their place and come to areas with huge down payments considering what they sold for, meaning that both first-time home buyers, downsizers, and just straight-up relocators were all on the move. What this did is it shifted the pressures to locals, who felt kind of pushed out of their own market, which is not unlike how a lot of the city folk felt. This resulted in buying trends that we all know and don't really love, except unless you're a seller, such as people going in with no conditions at all. And this had the unfortunate snowball effect that a lot of home inspectors effectively lost their jobs. I know in our area alone, we lost at least 3 great home inspectors as they moved on to other more consistent jobs. Competition is at an all-time high, and in an effort to stand out from the rest of the group, people were increasing the risk by submitting offers with no conditions and really quick closings. Now, as a quick aside, I'm not advocating for that as a realtor. I'm more recounting of what has been a trend in our area and what I've been hearing from fellow people who work in the industry. So now that we know the history and kind of how we got here, what can we do about it? Is it just a hopeless scenario? Are we stuck here? Well, no, actually, there are quite a few ways that we could get out of this. And this is not an exhaustive list by any means either. Obviously, the first answer is supply and demand. You probably knew that before you even clicked on this video. We need more supply, and fixing this would greatly reduce prices. Basic economics. Talk to any developer or builder out there, and they'll tell you incredible stories of red tape that have held up new development projects for years. I know of one project locally that was up for 16 years, but we'll skip over that. Municipalities are often at the forefront of slowing down developments, and what the public sees get discussed and approved is really just a fraction of the applications that actually get put in. Now, hold on. This is not to throw shade at municipal employees. Many folks working there are wonderful, and many people working in these positions do not have development or construction backgrounds, so everything from efficient build design to parking to just setting policy can be a big ask for them, and it's not fair for us to be putting that pressure on them specifically. It's not really their fault. Putting new development oversight onto municipalities that sometimes have positions that are effectively volunteer positions isn't fair. Especially in small towns, it often results in firms being hired who sometimes have never visited the town, know its layout, or could even find it on a map, making planning and development a bit of a mess, and we lose that consistent build philosophy that is so important to have over the long spanning years. So the solution here is to create new positions held by people with a lot of experience in development and construction. But that does come with an increased tax dollar as well, which not a lot of people are going to love. There needs to be better ways of giving municipalities a consistent foundation to work off of, instead of the current system of just asking them to kind of figure it out on their own, which is really unfair. We need support from both provincial and federal government to make this happen, but it is realistically doable. Now, the government has had some big policy changes recently too, with a big push towards intensification. This means more livable dwellings in a smaller geographic area. We cannot spread out and destroy our farms and forests forever, so the government has mandated we look at more creative solutions, such as more apartment buildings, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes. Even tiny housing has actually come up in conversation lately. Now, what this means for us, though, is although these are great looks forward, we should prepare ourselves that the reality of everyone having this really nice big piece of land to call their own is likely over. But the net benefit would be more long-term affordability for a lot of people. And another way to reduce pricing is the mortgage rates. This one is also already kind of on the way, but it's important to talk about. We are kidding ourselves if we think that borrowing money will be this cheap forever. Interest rates for mortgages are absolutely going to rise in the short term and long term. They have to. We've seen a lot of talk of that lately as well, so do not be surprised if recent news, and I do mean recent news, will contain rates increasing by a lot. I don't think the banks are going to shock the system by spiking prices up too high, because then just everyone will be upset, but increasing mortgage rates does reduce people's buying power across the board, which helps maintain a more regulated housing price. This will help, but it also is not a solve-all and needs to be combined with some of the other solutions, as reducing everyone's buying power does mean that the haves and have-not gap may get larger. And real estate investment trusts and investors in general are a lot more resistant to changes like this than the average buyer. Speaking of resistant to change, how we tackle affordable housing is broken. It's flat out broken. Affordable housing uses a term called market rent, which is really misleading. Market rent is a static term, and the number for it is given out by CMHC, the same folks that insure your 5% down payment. Government grants for affordable housing are based on keeping rent 20% below this market rent. Just a few examples of this shows how crazy the system is, though. Hamilton's market rent, according to CMHC, is $1,207. They say that Kitchener is $1,221. And in the municipality of Kincardine, it shows us the average rent is $998. In what world are those numbers accurate? Why this matters is twofold. On one hand, the government gives out rent supplement programs based on these numbers. So if your market rent is $998, but your real world rent is $1,600, you're going to have a really bad time, as we've seen from so many people on social media recently. This affects how many people can also get these programs per area as well, as there's a number cap based on that. The other issue is with creating new housing. Our government gives out grants to builders and developers where they give them, X amount of dollars per unit that the builder will put up, as long as they keep the rent below 20% market rent. Taking Kincardine, for instance, the builder would be forced to keep rent at $798.40. This makes it so difficult to rent, as now rent becomes a barrier to the builder to being a good investment for the developer or any potential investor or even bank to lend a mortgage to. My dad explains this point simply by saying, I've never had someone walk into my office and say, I want to make less money. And that's how the banks feel too for giving out mortgages. I personally know 2 different instances where builders applied for this grant, got the money, and when they realized what the difference would be between market rent and real world rent, combined with the investors just not being interested in the development anymore, they returned the grant money. This is how out of touch that system is. The concept of the system is great. We don't need to overhaul what it's trying to do, but the numbers they use in these calculations are they're completely out of whack. If we could solve just this issue with what market rent is set at, I genuinely believe we would see a lot more affordable housing units go up, which is what so many people have been crying out for. Coming back to the beginning, it is simple supply and demand. And that is the video today, folks. My name is Coultrup. I'm a broker with RE/MAX, and I live this stuff every day trying to help clients buy their first home, build their dream home, and everything in between. I really appreciate if you somehow made it this far into the video. If you enjoyed it, considering hitting all the buttons for liking and subscribing and following, check out my website for more updates, as I give weekly updates on how the market is going as well. And let me know if you'd be interested in more of these longer, deeper diver videos. This is really my first attempt at it, so I appreciate any feedback. Until next time, Bye for now.